University of California at Berkeley. And I noticed many people have mentioned that to my alma mater, and I'm happy to hear that. My publications concern the Spartan population decline. My book, Spartan Oliganthropia, was published last November. I'm a tenured assistant professor. I'm now an associate professor. I just received tenure as associate professor of ancient history at California State University, Los Angeles. I was hired there in 2012 to teach ancient history, and soon I proposed a semester-long class in Big History to be taught in the history department. The proposal was accepted after several levels of inspection, and finally it was officially added to the curriculum, and I teach it every semester. It has proven to be quite successful. In addition to using Big History Between Nothing and Everything as the textbook, that's the book that's co-written by David Christian, Cynthia Brown, and Craig Benjamin, I have my students read and discuss H.G. Wells's book, The Time Machine, and some excerpts from Darwin's Descent of Man, and some selections from Lucretius, who is the subject of this talk. A version of this talk, including all the references, will soon be posted on my academia.edu site. This talk explains why I teach my students in Los Angeles how the famous 1st century BC Roman poet and genius Lucretius deserves status as an early big historian for his at least proto-scientific view of the origin story of the cosmos and of life. His epic poem, De Rerum Natura, or On the Nature of Things, explains the ideas of the Epicureans, an intellectual school that began 2 centuries earlier in Athens. Before I continue, I should state that it is a real pleasure to address actual scientists and big historians, because in my field, in classics and Greco-Roman studies, the study of Lucretius is dominated by philologists. Many of them have a hostility toward science. Much of that hostility is conditioned by postmodernism. And their discussion of Lucretius tends to be dominated by an analysis of verb forms that he uses, Latin verb forms, or where he fits into the thought of his time, rather than taking the serious scientific nature of his ideas, in a real way. Certainly, many aspects of Lucretius' thought and Epicureanism may be argued to be relevant to big history, such as its reduction of reality to atoms, which Lucretius calls seeds, and void, and his insistence on understanding celestial events, such as eclipses, in a material matter. Most relevant to our conference here, Lucretius even gave views about intelligent life on other planets. Lucretius stated, this is in book 2 of De Rerum Natura, line 1052 and following, that since space is unlimited in all directions, and since the constituent elements of everything are uncountably numerous, there must be other worlds. And he wrote, you must admit that in other portions of the orb, means the orb of space, there are other earths and various breeds or lineages, he uses the term gentes, of people and species of wild animals. Necesse est confiteare esse alios aliis terrarum et paribus orbis et varias hominum gentis et saecula terrarum. However, one of the biggest and most central unifying ideas in the interdisciplinary study that we call big history is, of course, natural selection, acting not only on living forms and species that evolve, but on other registers and scales, from molecules to life forms to human groups, societies, and systems. And selection has allowed the increases in complexity on these scales. Since complexity and its increase is a fundamental link in all the scales that the idea of big history attempts to unite, natural selection is hence a fundamental cornerstone to big history. While we could think of natural selection as belonging to Charles Darwin, aided by Darwin's reading of Thomas Malthus, nevertheless, Lucretius possessed a startlingly early and advanced understanding of biological natural selection in the Darwinian sense. Hence, Lucretius was a Darwinian avant la lettre, despite, as we would guess, not understanding all the points that Darwin and Mendel and Watson and Crick would understand 2 millennia later about evolution. Lucretius, like Darwin, saw species in a constant state of slow change. saw many extinctions weeding out those less fit for their environment, saw adaptations developing among species, and saw natural selection as similar to deliberate human breeding of animals, only slower. First, he argued that species change over the course of time. This fact cannot have been obvious to many people in the 1st century BC, and so the observation is remarkable. Lucretius states in Book 5 that everything is altered by nature and compelled to change, then discusses the appearance on Earth of every species of animal, including humans. Immediately after this section, Lucretius states that some organisms born are unfit for life, and hence cannot reproduce because they do not tend to live long enough to reach the age of sexual maturity and reproduction, the age of reaching the pleasures of Venus, as he calls the age of reproduction. What he imagines here is quite extreme, beings born without mouths and so unable to eat and so on. Admittedly, this is far cruder than Darwin's vision of slightly more offspring being born to some individuals in a species possessing characteristics favorable in certain environments, resulting in slow change to some subpopulations of that species. However, Lucretius does realize the essential point. He sees nature performing selection, and he clearly contrasts and compares this process to the selection regulated by human beings who perform deliberate breeding upon animals. Both processes, that performed by nature and that performed by human beings, can sculpt biological lineages if carried on over sufficient amounts of time. He writes, in those days, many species, multa cycla animantum, many cycla of living, breathing things, must have died out altogether and failed to forge the chain of offspring. Every species that you now see drawing the breath of life has been protected and preserved from the beginning of the world, either by cunning or by courage or by speed. In addition, there are many that survive under human protection because their usefulness has commended them to our care. He continues. The surly breed of lions, for example, in their native ferocity, have been preserved by courage, the fox by cunning, and the stag by flight. On the other hand, he says, the intelligent dog, loyal of heart and light of sleep, all beasts of burden of whatever breed, fleecy sheep and horned cattle, over all these man has established his protectorate. They have gladly escaped from predatory beasts and sought peace and the lavish meals, procured by no effort of theirs, with which we recompense their service. But those that were gifted with none of these natural assets, unable either to live on their own resources or to make any contribution to human welfare, in return for which we might let their race feed in safety under our guardianship, all these trapped in the snares of their own destiny were fair game and an easy prey to others, till nature brought their race to extinction. This itself, I would say, is a quite staggering insight, and after it comes a fascinating anthropological section on early human beings that is also worth reading and utilizing for the study of big history. But at this point, I wish briefly to bring up another topic, that is Lucretius's ideas about teleology, after which I will tie these together to conclude. Closely accompanying his naturalist view of the change of species, Lucretius saw no overarching divine plan or teleology in the universe. For in Epicureanism, the universe came into existence randomly, and its processes are essentially random. This Epicurean stance was a bold and precociously scientific view for his time, and it contradicted the teleology of the major philosophical schools of the Greco-Roman world, such as the Platonists, the Aristotelians, and the Stoics, as well as the generally teleological tone of Greco-Roman religion, which of course featured immensely powerful and providential gods, such as Jupiter and his Old Greek counterpart Zeus, as we see in the intentionality of Zeus portrayed by Homer in the Iliad in lines like, "And the will of Zeus was near to its fulfillment." Some of this has been nicely explained in Gordon Campbell's 2003 book, Lucretius on Creation and Evolution, who calls the teleological and anti-teleological views fundamentally different and opposed. However, Lucretius dedicated his Epicurean epic to a divine being and addresses her throughout the poem. This may seem to rule out any claim that he was denying importance to the gods in his cosmology. Yet of all the gods he chose the goddess Venus. She is, of course, on one hand, the mythological mother of the Roman race, but on the other hand, she has another important feature. She was the goddess of sexuality and hence reproduction. And a goddess of reproduction was highly suitable for Lucretius's biological view of all of nature. Venus is represented as nature itself, constantly producing offspring and even allowing species to change their forms gradually over time. Hence, she could be represented by Lucretius appropriately as a force, more like our conceptions today of gravity or of the strong electromagnetic force, rather than as a volitive or self-consciously willful entity. Even when he represents her as possessing will, this volition can be seen as a literary trope, rather than a belief in a providential entity like a god. In Book 1, Lucretius says that though through Venus alone are the oceans and lands filled with living beings, hence no other entities are responsible for this in his worldview. They are hers because she instills throughout every living being what Lucretius calls amor. Clearly not meaning love, but lust, the inborn and natural desire to mate and reproduce. And he says to her, in the hearts of all you instill tempting amor. You bring about through desire the eternal generations forth, kind after kind. This anti-teleology is related closely to Lucretius's view of natural selection, for it shows that while species change over time and some live and die, this is not part of an intended divine plan, but part of nature itself. The only role that any god truly has in Lucretius's description of the natural world is Venus's role, again, of instilling the desire to procreate into living beings. Hence, Lucretius's universe possesses strong similarities to the anti-teleological naturalistic cosmology of mainstream modern science. To conclude, I would like to argue that teaching certain points of Lucretius in a big history setting provides some important uses. First and most basically, it shows that the lineaments of natural selection were known at least by some intellectuals 2 millennia before Darwin's publication of The Origin of Species in 1859. Second, it shows that despite some views to the contrary, the world before the advent of modern science was not entirely characterized by a fully religious mindset in which the universe's origin story is simply explained by the whims of gods. This important realization is discussed well in Tim Whitmarsh's recent book, Battling the Gods, Atheism in the Ancient World, which is really less about strict atheism in Greco-Roman antiquity than simply the history of questioning the nature and reality of divine entities. Thirdly, teaching Lucretius in this sort of class allows a significant communication between what is usually thought of as the humanities, here in the person of an ancient Roman author, with the sciences, despite what C.P. Snow derided as an unbridgeable gap in his lecture, The Two Cultures, appearing exactly 100 years after that book of Darwin's. And this, I think, is one of the strongest and most effective aspects of the discipline that we call big history. Thank you.
Questions, please.
A little bit louder. Do you have an opinion on the book The Swerve? If you do, does it oversell the influence of Lucretius on modernity and scientific revolution?
That's a great question. So Stephen Greenblatt wrote The Swerve. I first became aware of it because an excerpt of it was published in the New Yorker, to which I have been religiously subscribing since about 1992. Right, so in a way, we would say that he does oversell it a bit, and the serious scholars of Lucretius that I know don't tend to like that book. That is a popularizing book. Having said that, however, there is obviously, I hope we would all agree, a place for popularizing books on, academic and esoteric subjects. So yes, he may be arguing his point. He might be stretching a little bit, but overall, I would say that that's a completely worthwhile book. Yes.
Reject teleology in terms of scientific viewpoint, but determinism
Right.
could be see that as teleological.
You're right. I don't reject some forms of determinism. The form of teleology that I would reject would be, on the one hand, something like a divine notion that the gods have in their mind a plan that Achilles needs to die, that kind of teleology, which I think did dominate, not entirely, the mode of thinking before the scientific revolution. I would say that some forms of determinism are fine. The notion that it is inevitable that some molecules will come together to form a prebiotic compound, I don't have any problem with that at all. I don't consider that teleological. I would say that the form of teleology that I'm saying Lucretius went again was one that requires some sort of divine mind. That's what I would say. I would make that distinction. And thank you. That's an important thing to point out. Hope you're all happy that I went really fast and didn't push out the time. Thank you.